For the resumption of our programs, I have chosen what I consider to be the principal, all-encompassing story within which the Gnostic worldview is manifest. And that is the one contained in an old ancient poem, the Hymn of the Pearl, as it is generally known. You know, usually these mythic cycles don't have a title. People give it a title on the basis of the contents. So the alternative title for the Hymn of the Pearl is the Hymn of the Robe of Glory, which the great translator G.R.S. Mead called it, and even a modern commentator whose book I have here, Mr. John Davidson, has also revived it and calls it the Robe of Glory. Now, I have obviously spoken about mythic themes here many times, and many of you were present, others were not, but at the danger of repetition is great, and therefore I will try just to concentrate very, very much the introductory part, in the sense that since the beginning of time, and certainly the beginning of humanity, there have been unusual and often inspiring and transformative, insight-producing experiences that human beings became the partakers of. Never a majority, but always some. And these visionary and inspiring experiences then came to be utilized in various ways. And unfortunately, quite often they came to be mistaken for history and represented factually. For instance, it is very likely, although we have no direct report of that sort, that the ancient Greek myths, as they were catalogued by various great writers, Hoeller and others, were at least in part regarded as history by the Greeks themselves. But of course that was only a certain portion of the populace, while the smaller but far more creative segment of the populace thought so highly and in such depth about their myths that they usually incorporated into, or more than that, they made them the foundational element in the so-called mysteries. The mysteries having been associations, just to recollect it very quickly, which were present and were practiced for the purpose of creating interior transcendental experience in the initiates. And practically without exception, each one of these mysteries was based on at least one major myth, such as the very famous and very durable Eleusinian mysteries were based on the myth of Persephone and Demeter. The Dionysian mysteries obviously on Dionysius, and so on and so forth. So obviously there was a recognition, at least on the part of some people, in every ancient historical period, that these tales, these stories, were to be understood in an other than external fashion. And that is very important for our purposes. So let us say when people had profound experiences, or today for that matter, or any one of us, because certainly, let's say, the experience of gnosis in various forms and modifications is a possibility, a likelihood for any and all human beings. It is a human thing to do, to know more than one ordinarily is taught in the world, and to for that knowing, that knowledge, to extend into profound and transcendental realms of consciousness. So when people have such experiences, what do they do with it? Well, probably I am abbreviating it a little too much, but I would say there are three major ways in which people can deal with unusual, transcendental, or Gnostic, if you want to use that term, experience. The first is that they do virtually nothing with it. This or that happened to me, I saw a great light, whatever, the angels were coming and going, but it just remains. It remains a memory of an unusual experience, but there's nothing much done with it. However, as I indicated before, another thing that maybe, and very frequently is done with this then, that the experience is factualized. What do I mean by that? It is understood in a factual manner. To use the same silly example of before, I saw a great big bunch of angels, and this was a fact. I saw that, that's it. And so the problem with the factualization of the unusual, of the transcendental, of the mystical is, as various people have pointed out, I can only think of one who made a very fine statement of it a couple of times, and that was the late Anagarika Govinda, who said that the trouble with a fact is that it's finished. It's not going anywhere. You can't really do anything with it. And therefore, when it comes to these more transcendental and metaphysical issues, facts are fairly useless. Now, a little more complex and a little deeper level of attempted understanding is that the experience is intellectualized, that the experience is turned into doctrine, into something to believe in, a theology or a statement of ethical and moral maxims. With this, of course, also there exists a good deal of difficulty, because something of a really often of a very profound nature, something that certainly since C.G. Jung we often call of an archetypal nature, is evaluated in terms of the more or less rigid categories of the thinking function, or as it otherwise is called, the mind. I am reminded of a statement which having had quite a bit of exposure to that field, I can agree with enthusiastically, that the definition of theology is that it is knowing all about God but nothing of God. So when at best the intellectual formulations about transcendental things remain inadequate, and experience is reduced to theological or moral categories which for the most part have very little real relationship to the experience. The third and the most important, and for our purposes certainly all-important way of approaching unusual experience is that it is turned into myth. Namely, the experience gives rise to symbolic statements which depict the interior realities. Once again, you will pardon me using a Jungian term, the archetypal images in the form of a living symbolic story. This is extremely important, in many ways very useful. And that leads us now to a particular approach to reality and to our lives and our consciousness, namely the one that, for lack of a more expressive term, has been called Gnostic, or the experience as Gnosis. The late great Dutch scholar, who was also a close advisor and friend of C.G. Jung, Professor Gilles Quispel, whom we remember, who spoke for us here many years ago. Very interesting, nice gentleman. Quispel wrote at one time, "Gnosis is personal spiritual experience that is turned into myth." So there are certain kinds of inner experiences which can be best expressed in mythic form. Now, myth, as Jung pointed out again, I'm haunted by him a little more tonight than usual, I guess. Myth is very different from an allegory. An allegory is still several steps removed from experience. An allegorical statement is said, this experience here is somewhat like that experience. So there is the comparative element. And while that may be to a certain extent useful, it is not really what is required. So what we have then, the experience gives rise to symbolic statements which depict what we might call the archetypal images in the form of a living symbolic story. C.G. Jung, this may be the last time, at least in this first 10 minutes, that I will quote him. C.G. Jung was one to say that a myth, the important thing about a myth is that it is a key to a mystery. There is something within and behind the myth. And by dealing with the myth and allowing it to work on our consciousness, realities that are beyond the actual overt mythic content themselves are likely to open themselves to us. And that is indeed a very important issue. Now, just another little hint, one of the greatest mythic scholars, mythologists of the modern era, my countryman, and interestingly enough, he was an acquaintance of my parents. he and his wife had been to our house, I remember it well, namely Professor Carl Kerenyi, who wrote tremendous books about the Eleusinian mysteries in general, about mythic themes. Dr. Kerenyi, and you can find that if you want to look it up, in a little book that is called Essays on the Science of Mythology, which he co-authored with Jung. Kerenyi said that if you want to get a real example of, a real feeling for a myth, then you will do well in looking at the myths of the Gnostics, because there the myth comes sort of directly from the perception of the original experiencer. It is a direct statement of experience. When you get to, and I certainly love the Greek and Roman myths, however, by the time the Greek mythographers wrote down the Greek myths, those myths were already very old. They underwent all kinds of interpretations and elaborations and changes, and therefore they are several steps, many steps removed from the experience, while the Gnostics wrote of their experiences on a much more immediate basis. Now then, so we might say that the perennial way of communicating spiritual experience has always been always mythic, and more, maybe even more importantly, in the mythic communication there is always a strong possibility that there may arise a process of facilitating similar spiritual experiences in oneself and in others. So when we recount an authentic myth, it's an inducement to us to do likewise, to come close to that subject matter, to experience at least something of a similar nature. And that, of course, is a great advantage. Now, in order to get to our particular myth and the text within which it is contained, we really need to move forward. I have been occupied with the Gnostic tradition, literally since my childhood. Some of us are funny that way, maybe in other ways too, but funny that way. And so I have come to the conclusion, and most Gnostic scholars of Gnosticism, I think, agree, that there are 4 big mythic themes that are present within and are revealed to us in the Gnostic scriptures. And they are as follows. The number 1, the myth of the journey of the human soul. That is the one that we are concerned with tonight. The second, we will be hopefully concerned with next week. That is the myth of the eternal feminine, also known generally as Sophia, the wisdom woman. The third is the myth of the Savior, which is of course contained in the Gospels, both Gnostic and canonical. And the fourth is the myth of the Demiurge, which is a little more specifically Gnostic, and which has to do with the intermediate forces that exist between the ultimate reality and ourselves. And you might say that these are the ones that tend to divert us and give us various problems. But tonight we shall deal with the first of these, the myth of the journey of the soul. It is by no means an unknown or minimally known circumstance that most people have deeply within us a notion, a feeling, a kind of budding myth, a mythic understanding that we are indeed on some kind of a journey. In fact, the term journey has become a favorite one in the New Age. And you know, when something becomes very popular, then it usually begins to lose its meaning. That's the way things are. Popularity is a great danger. A wise man will guard himself, or wise woman will guard ourselves from becoming too popular. But let us say that I think it's a very frequent feeling. I know that along with some people, not an awful lot, it's a minority position, I somehow was born with the, how should we call it, the ability of being dissatisfied with being born and having a very strong feeling that I don't belong here. Now, if you are a good Freudian analyst or something like that, you can make something out of it, and you are certainly welcome to do so. If that qualifies me as being what in Fairfax Avenue we would call Meshuggah, well, that's all right. Go right ahead. But let's say the notion that we are not here statically, that we have been plumped down here, and now we got to do whatever we need to do. We need to till the soil and make and grow potatoes, or whatever the case may be. It's not. It doesn't resonate with some of us, but rather we have an underlying feeling that there is something that is moving, that there is a movement, there is a development, there is a journey. And therefore that is a very appealing mythic theme, because it speaks to something deeply within ourselves, which is true of all really mythic themes. Now, that being the case, I need to jump on at a little bit of the more objective level and just identify where this story comes from. It comes from a scripture called the Acts of Thomas, officially called the Acts of the Holy Apostle Thomas, which I need to remind you is quite different from the Gospel of Thomas, and it's actually a scripture that has been known for quite a long time before the Naj Hammadi discovery, and it has in it a mythic story told by and told about the Apostle Thomas, the Apostle of Jesus, who is regarded as a person of very deep insight and of very deep experiences. So if you come across the Acts of the Apostle Thomas, they are certainly worth reading. It has several mystical themes, some of which I do not belong to this evening's subject, and one of these is what is called the mystic vision of the heavenly marriage. So the Acts of Thomas is really a tale of a journey, and the mythic and the dramatic format into which is placed that Thomas was very close to Jesus. In fact, in Greek he's called Didymos, Judas Thomas, Didymos the twin, which has been interpreted by a lot of Gnostic scholars as indicating that in early days they felt that this apostle, disciple of Jesus, was so close to him that he was literally his twin. And so after the master is no longer there physically, he appears to Thomas and he gives him the command to undertake, you guessed it, a journey. And he tells him, you somewhat like the hippie apostles in the 60s, you gotta go to India. So Thomas accepts that and goes. And on the journey he encounters various things, but probably two main visionary experiences. The first one he encounters I bypass that very quickly. First one he encounters in a city where his ship stops for a while and where he's invited to a wedding. And while he is there at the wedding feast, he is transported to a spiritual wedding where he sees the divine logos, the articulated thought of the divine, and the divine wisdom, the feminine wisdom, as conjoining and as getting married. So he has a big mystical experience there, but he was told to go to India, and he is an obedient apostle, so he gets on the boat and goes to India. Now there is actually, not that that's really important, but there is some historical evidence that a Christian teacher, an apostle, whose name was Thomas, did come to southern India, lived there and died there, and was buried not very far from the city of Madras, actually, so I understand, although I haven't been there, quite close to the international headquarters of the Theosophical Society, of our society, which is outside of Madras. And there is still a place there that is called St. Thomas Mountain. People have told me when you fly into Madras, you always fly over Thomas Mountain, and that was the original tomb of the Apostle Thomas. In any event, that is important only in the sense that in the Acts of Thomas, the story goes that Thomas goes to India, he starts preaching his Christian doctrine there, and he runs afoul of a local ruler, undoubtedly a local Maharaja. And they throw him in prison. And so as he gets, I'm sure that the prison system in India was not of a very humane and exalted nature at that time. I imagine it's not today either. But in any event, he comes down into the big dungeon, which is full of prisoners, and the prisoners run up to him and say, "Oh, you are a holy man, you please tell us a beautiful story, we are so miserable here, and if you would tell us a beautiful story, it would really make our day." Probably not much more than that. But anyway, it would help them. So Thomas sits down and tells the story. And this story is the one that we are dealing with today, which is has been called by the scholars the hymn or the story of the pearl. Now let me see. All right. What I'm going to do, and I hope time will not run out with me, I will read individual passages as the story proceeds from the translation of the original text, and then attach my interpretation to it. Some of the original text I will have to abbreviate for the sake of not keeping you here all night. It's in the first person. Thomas here becomes the narrator, becomes the representative of humanity. When I was a little child and dwelt in the kingdom of my father's house and delighted in the wealth and splendor of those who raised me, my parents sent me forth from the east, our homeland, with provisions for the journey. And then a description is given of all the beautiful and valuable things that were given to him to be with him on his journey. And then after that is recounted, then he said that there was also given to him a beautiful purple mantle, a cloak, a mantle, a robe. To my mind, this is something like the Roman toga, and I will tell you a little more about that. So they gave him his purple mantle, my purple mantle, that was woven to conform exactly to my figure. And they made a covenant with me, they being obviously his parents, and wrote it in my heart that I might not forget it. And here is what they wrote. When thou goest down into Egypt, and bringest the one pearl which lies in the middle of the sea, which is encircled by the roaring serpent, thou shalt put on again thy robe of glory, and thy mantle over it, and with thy brother our next in rank, be heir in our kingdom. So obviously he recounts his origins in a transcendental, in a heavenly world, in a different region, a different plane of existence, from whence he is sent by his elders and by his parents down into this world of ours for a particular purpose, to find a pearl and to bring it back. Now, let's say a little bit about some of this. When I was just a little child, that's how he begins it. And so what we have here is, let's say, a statement of the importance of youthful inexperience. The useful inexperience of the soul in its original condition. So we might say we are all innocents when we go forth into this world. And a certain naivete is to be expected of us. We are not of this world, and thus we are naive, and mistakes will be made. Which I think is a very comforting notion, because most of us, so at least some of the psychologists, especially the Freudians, those terrible Freudians, they always trying to convince us that one of the issues that we are facing all throughout our lives is guilt, that we feel sorry about what we may have encountered, what we may have done here in the world. But here the indication is that the soul comes for a purpose, not just fortuitously, but for a purpose is sent into this very different kind of reality, and that in so doing, owing to the soul's inexperience and naivete, it undergoes various vicissitudes. So the notion that our difficulties in this life are due to a great degree to guilt is certainly not part of this picture. In fact, I would venture to suggest that that notion is one that was not really present in early Christianity. It came to a very great extent quite a bit later with a very brilliant but very peculiar church father named Saint Augustine. You can pronounce him Augustine or Augustine. It's all, the pronunciation is up to you. He was a very brilliant man, but let's say in his thinking a bit quirky, which is not an uncommon condition among church fathers then or now. And one of his big ideas, if you don't mind that vulgar expression, one of his big ideas was that we as humanity, in a collective humanity, has committed what came to be called an original sin. And this, of course, is tied up with the whole story in Genesis with the talking snake and the apple and all that sort of thing, which is taken literally by St. Augustine. And so we are imperfect and miserable because of some kind of a curse that has been imposed on the human race. And now this is, let's say, this is certainly not part of a Gnostic understanding. Then provisions for the journey are given to him, which are a great burden which is light. So we are not sent forth from our point of origin, according to this myth. We are not sent forth without resources. We have what it takes to prevail. We have it, and we have it by right. We don't, and not by grace or merit, which I'm not going to go into. But let's say we may be a little crying baby when we get here. I don't think any of us in this room have come here in any other way. Now, if any of you have come in a flying saucer or something like that as an adult, well, tell me afterwards, and preferably confidentially, you know. But let's say it seems as if we are very weak and we don't have anything. Yet we have received provisions for the journey. And so the narrating protagonist does state that. And when we say we have it by right, we have it by right of our souls. This is what we are. We have resources. We have the potential of life in a reality which is different from the original, and we have the potential to prevail in that life. And to realize that to some degree is not easy, because we are forever surrounded by all kinds of difficulties, and it often appears to us that we're helpless, at least to a considerable extent. And as the descent, the going forth of this celestial child goes on, he says, they took from me my robe of glory. Now the robe in a Greco-Roman context, which of course was the prevailing cultural matrix even in New Testament times, the robe is the outer mark of dignity. In Rome it was called the toga. it wasn't just the Romans put on a bed sheet and walked around, which is sometimes the way they look in the pictures, but rather to receive the toga was a big deal. It was like an initiation. It was like, that's when men wore togas, and when they were not wearing the toga was an overgarment, and a tunic is worn under it, which is usually only about goes to your knees, and that is what people wore for their ordinary pursuit. When they went to an important place, then they wore the toga. And it's that kind of a robe of dignity that we need to keep in mind here. So, and the robe, moreover, that conforms to his true form. So we are divested of the outer signs of a true inward dignity. It's very important. So you might say, each and every one of us, we are a book that should not be judged by its cover. Our present garments, these tunics that we wear here of one kind or the other, that's not what we are. But there is an inner nature which is one of great import and of great dignity and of great potential insight and wisdom. But its overt manifesting presence has somehow been taken away from us, which is probably another reason why the child cries when it is born, as I think Buddha said, that the child is wise because it cries when it is born into this world. I can sympathize with that. You're born, you look around, you say, "Oh no, not this place again." So this is, and then he received the command, a covenant written in his heart. Now, a covenant is if indeed this is a good translation, because the Acts of Thomas has two versions. One is in Aramaic and one is in Syriac, and the translations are a little bit different. But in any event, we are, let's say, we are bidden to undertake a task, but even though we know inside of ourselves that we have certain resources, it is still always a very difficult situation. So the command, however, is a task. The Gnostic myth says we are not just thrown out of our heavenly habitat for no good reason, or because of the whisperings of a talking snake in paradise, or anything of that sort, but we are sent for a purpose. This is what needs to be kept in mind. The purpose is finding something. In the myth here it is about finding a treasure. Not just... So we are not just here in order to, not just to be liberated from the woes of the world, which no doubt we often dearly desire, but by bringing something back. Now this is the great, I don't know what we want to call it, the many thousand piasters or whatever monetary unit they used at that time question. What is it? But it is identified as one expects in a symbolic fashion. The one pearl which lies in the middle of the sea. Why a pearl? I would say, I like pearls. It's genuine. It's a pretty nice one. But let's say, if I'm going to go in search of a treasure, well, I don't know. Why not a great big diamond? Why not a Kohinoor? Or for that matter, a nice big purple amethyst? No, it's a pearl. Well, obviously we can speculate about that, but I think one of the symbolic meanings is that what is the pearl? A pearl is different from other jewels. It's not a mineral that is mined out of the ground. It has been called poetically the tear of the oyster. It is a precious thing that is produced by injured life, because impurities get into the oyster, and then the oyster fights that impurity, and when this substance that the oyster excretes is solidified, it becomes a pearl. We might also say, even though people are very fond of the notion of evolution, I am not so fond of it, because it's, if evolution is, especially in consciousness, is truly real, how come there aren't any smart people in the world like Plato and Aristotle and Plotinus and Hermes, if he was ever human? We have gotten more stupid folks rather than not smarter. So this idea that with every incarnation and with every year we are getting smarter and smarter, well, I don't see much evidence of it. I really don't. But in any event, similarly, the pearl is not an evolutionary product. No, it's something that comes about as the result of the defense and the attempted self-healing of the oyster. So that is quite an important symbolic meaning right there. And therefore, I would venture to suggest, while there is no end of gnosis, of a true myth, because you discover more and more. But I think the very notion of gnosis, of discovering an interior knowledge of the true reality of being, is gnosis, and it is produced in the sea of life. It has also, in one of the Gnostic scriptures, the symbol is called the ocean of forgetfulness. And so there the mystery of the pearl is formed. Also, in one of the Gnostic Gospels, I'm pretty certain it's in Philip, with whom we dealt not long ago, is, the symbol of pearl comes up in many places, but there is one where I think it's attributed to Jesus, who says, when the pearl falls into the mud, it still has the value in the sight of its owner at all times. So in a sense you might say, when wisdom, when goodness, when for that matter the human spirit enters an experiential realm which is not very clean and not very appealing, it still is what it is. I don't know whether I should quote that, but what the heck, it's not really meaningful to anybody else but myself. My mother frequently had an adage in a somewhat dialect-formed German, mir san mir. That's very Austrian. We are us. In other words, be aware of your own potential. Be aware of the nobility of your being, that we are somebody, as the Spanish would call it. It applies to a man. Hijo de algo, the son of somebody. And this is an important thing, and it has become very much lacking in many forms of Christianity, where we are reduced to a miserable sinner. As I have sometimes said, well, you know, I lived a long time by now, surely I have committed some sins and I'm a sinner, but I'm not miserable about it. Okay, why be miserable about it? So really the pearl is also a metaphor for the soul, or the oversoul, the self with a capital S. So enclosed in an animal, if you want to call it, the oyster, underneath the waters of unconsciousness, the center of real consciousness hides. That is what we really are. We as the oyster, and rather as the pearl in the oyster. And this has to be found. And what is truly sort of momentous about the statement of empowerment of our traveler is that apparently heaven itself will be mysteriously enriched if we do. That has, when I came to that realization, which I think it is, it really sort of made me shake, because not only will I be better off if I have a profound gnosis, if I have a profound consciousness, but the entirety of being clear up to the highest heavens will be enriched by such a discovery. So we are really fulfilling a function which profits the cosmos and beyond the cosmos. So I would say we better try to do a good job. Now then, let me see, what am I doing here? Oh yeah, here is my book. So now we come to his descent into our world. I left the East. The East is the symbol of heaven. It's the symbol of the gods. That's why turning toward the east where the sun rises has been sort of the sacred gesture of many religious traditions. Perhaps the one that we know most of in that regard are the ancient Egyptians, whose influence really on our world and our culture is much, much greater than most people suspect. In any event, he says, I left the east and took my way downwards, accompanied by 2 royal envoys, since the way was dangerous and hard, and I was young for such a journey. I passed over the borders, and it describes names of various places which are really Middle Eastern towns of that time, and then I went down into Egypt, and my companions parted from me. That's kind of one of the unhappy things. Here you have some people helping you, and then they say, "Okay, boy, now you're on your own. Bye bye." You know, that's not a pleasant feeling. So I went straightway to the serpent, and settled down close by his inn, until he should slumber and sleep, so that I might take the pearl from him. So he has a pretty direct approach. He isn't just wandering around in the world, but he knows where the serpent is, and he goes right there. So he'd be on hand for the task. And there at this inn, which he called the Inn of the Serpent, that should tell you something about it, probably not a very savory place. You know, I have been in some motels that could be called the Inn of the Serpent. You know, so there he is, and there in that inn, I saw there one of my kind, a fair and well-favored youth, the son of kings, and literally of anointed ones. He came and attached himself to me, and I made him my trusted familiar, to whom I imparted my mission. He, and here actually the gender of this companion whom we finds is linguistically not clear. The translator says, I, he, warned him, me. So we don't really know whether this was a he or a she. But this person warned me against the Egyptians and the contact with unclean ones. Yet I clothed myself in their garments, lest the serpent, lest they suspect me as one coming from without to take the pearl, and arouse the serpent against me. But through some cause they marked that I was not their countryman, and they ingratiated themselves with me, and mixed me a drink with their cunning, and gave me to taste of their food, and I forgot that I was a king's son, and served their king. I forgot the pearl for which my parents had sent me. Through the heaviness of their nourishment, I sank into a deep slumber. Well, now is the catastrophe. He came there very consciously. He situated himself in such a way that he would have an easier time getting the pearl, and then he falls into a stupor, and awakening from the stupor, he literally doesn't know what he why he came. And he says, among other things, I forgot that I was a king's son. I forgot the pearl for which my parents had sent me. Through the heaviness of their nourishment, I sank into the deep slumber. So what is happening here? There is a forgetfulness. And there are many traditions, some of them in India, elsewhere, where the issue of forgetfulness, the forgetfulness of the real, forgetting our true purpose, forgetting who we are, forgetting our potential, is of great import. And so as we eat of the world, in the Old Testament there is a metaphor which has been used in that fashion, and it has been repeated in some of the Gnostic scriptures, the lentils of Esau, which is an Old Testament story. The lentils of Esau have a deleterious effect on the consciousness also of the one who eats it. So we cannot depend on the forces of this world to nourish us. They are not of our essence. We as the soul need, there was a good term for it. I never thought it was a bad term, and some of the food was good too. Soul food. See, food for the soul. When we have that nourishes that part of our nature that needs to be nourished. But other than that, we have difficulties. So don't take the counterfeit nourishment, the false soul food. So there is discernment is necessary. And the food that we are talking about are the reality, such as it is, the experiences of the world, ourselves in the world. And we have to cultivate within ourselves. Again, these things don't just fall out of a big celestial Christmas tree and then we have them, but we have to nourish them. We have to develop them within ourselves. We have to develop a sense of discernment. The term discrimination has become a bad word in a sociological sense, so I won't use that. But we have to know how to discern the useful from the not useful. And also the, let's say, the good and the deleterious. Otherwise we can't make any progress in our endeavor. And this is very important. This is what in Sanskrit, in the yoga systems, I think in Patanjali, the Yoga Sutras, is called vairagya, discernment. You have to know how to discern. You have to learn the important from the unimportant, the good from the bad, the wise from the stupid. If we had all that developed, we'd be in a heck of a good shape. But we are not. Now, what happens after that? Well, his parents, who know everything, have discovered what's happened to their child, their son, and he says, my parents grieved for me. As all this befell me, my parents marked and they were grieved for me. It was proclaimed in our kingdom that all should come to our gates. And now he recounts all the sort of the great important officials of heaven, obviously heavenly spirits, angels, transcendental beings, the kings and grandees, they come together and they together wore a plan that I must not be in Egypt forsaken. And they wrote a letter to me, and each of the great ones signed it with his name. And here is maybe I won't read the whole thing, it's not very long, but I want you to get the tone of the letter. Because now this is the communication that comes from on high, from the place of reality, from the heaven world, from the celestial father and mother to their child who has been captured by a different reality and who has lost his contact with the heaven world. Does that sound a little bit familiar? It sure does. From thy father, the King of Kings, and from thy mother, the Empress of the East, and from thy brother, our next in rank, unto thee, our son in Egypt, greeting. And now is the one that I always love, especially if I find it. Yes. Awake and rise up out of thy sleep, and perceive the words of our letter. Remember that thou art a king's child. Behold whom thou hast served in bondage. Be mindful of the pearl, for those for whose sake thou hast departed into Egypt. Remember thy robe of glory, recall thy splendid mantle, that thou mayest put them on and deck thyself with them, and thy name be read in the book of the heroes, and thou become with thy brother our deputy, heir in our kingdom. So here is the great message, the message of the letter. Extremely important passage. So they send a letter. What is such a letter? Well, everything that assists us in life and that we put to good use in terms of our spiritual future, in terms of the recognizing the true purpose of our lives, is such a letter. And this is extremely important. Because when we fall asleep, the inner being of truth, our spiritual father and mother, will not let us rest. That is really our hope. We can forget, but there is something, somebody, some reality, some heaven world, some father and mother that hasn't forgotten. So we are not forgotten. We are not forsaken. Even though we might forget, that other consciousness has not forgotten us. And that lack of forgetfulness of the higher power, which is often something that Jung called it, the higher power has not forgotten us. And this circumstance is our hope. This is our hope for future. I know that, as the spiritual says, sometimes I feel like a motherless child, that we feel bereft, that we feel forgotten. Nobody looks after me, nobody is going to help me. I am miserable and nobody helps me in my misery. But we have to keep in mind that as powerful as those feelings are, and some of the experiences we have been going through the last year and a half, and it looks like we are still going through it to some extent and degree now, they should prove to us how terrible that is. Because when a great danger, or at least a perceived danger, is around us, and we have we have really no help. There's nobody we can turn to. We really feel like a motherless child. You know. This is not a good condition to be in, and I don't think you need me telling you that. It's really a very sad condition to be in. But the truth and the reality proclaimed by every spiritual tradition is that although it may feel that way, although sometimes the data of our lives seem to point in that direction, we have not been forgotten. We are not alone. But we need to be receptive. And our receptivity is diminished and cut down by many circumstances of our lives. And I know that there are some circumstances in our culture and so, I mean, you know, I don't know, I think if somebody offered to me to transport me into ancient Egypt, I'd take it, just to be out of this culture now. It just, you know, and I just don't like what's going on. I'm sorry to say so, but I don't. But on the other hand, we are not left alone. We do have help, but we have to be receptive to it. And if in proportion to the growth of our receptivity, the help also comes. And the help comes largely in form of that letter. And I'm not a big nature man. I couldn't call myself a boy at my age. You know, not a nature boy. But you know, I don't get terribly inspired by the external environment. You know, trees, okay. Some trees are real nice. The rest of them I would just as soon forget about. You know, and flowers. Well, again, there are some flowers that are nice, and so on and so forth. And certainly among the living creatures, I could very well do without some of the insect life, particularly ants at the present time, you know. I mean, you know, it's just a lot of disturbing stuff around here. And this, of course, all causes difficulties. And so we fall asleep. And as we fall asleep, we will be awakened. But we also have to have a mindset that allows us to listen to to the voice of awakening. And this is, I think, a particularly great difficulty in our present culture. Hopefully it will not stay that way. Because when all is said and done, except for a very few people, and sometimes even from them only for a period of time, the non-material reality, the transcendental reality, is not regarded as, it should be, as a reality. That which is beyond this world is not regarded as real. But watch out, and certainly there are some things beyond this world which are not particularly real, but there is something there that is real. And if you don't come to recognize that there is something there that is real, and if that you cannot call to that reality, and if that reality doesn't respond to you, then you are really in very great trouble. And that's, of course, what is happening in a secular culture such as ours, where only the extroverted data of life are considered real and not anything else. Yet, we are coming now toward the end, never fear. So, like a messenger was the letter that the king had sealed with his right hand, so he awakens. Aha! So the letter does its work. Just as was written on my heart were the words of my letter to read. This is extremely important. Because if there were not that potential for awakening, the potential for enlightenment, the potential for bodhi, as you would say in Sanskrit, in us, then all the messages and messengers and all the inspirations and all the angelic visitations coming to us would avail us nothing. The reason that we can respond to the promptings of the higher reality, to the higher power, is because in a very mysterious manner, some of that higher reality is within us. We have the ears to hear, we have the eyes to see, we have the ability to respond. And that is really the most important thing, because if that were not so, then all the trumpet calls of Gabriel and the last judgment is all the time would not avail us anything. So my letter, which had awakened me, I found before me on my way. But before that, he now performs his work. He goes to the water. I remembered the pearl now, for which I had been sent down to Egypt, and I began to enchant the terrible, and here he calls it snorting serpent. I like to call it roaring serpent. I charmed it into sleep by naming over it my father's name, the name of our next in rank, and the name of my mother, the Empress of the East. I seized the pearl and turned to repair home to my father. Their filthy and impure garment I put off, and left it behind in their land, and directed my way that I might come to the light of the homeland, the East. So now he is able to perform his task. It's interesting in certain ways. Now, if this scripture had been written not in the early apostolic age, first, second century or so, if it had been written in the Middle Ages or something like that, what he would have done. He would have gotten his knightly sword and he would have fought the roaring or sorting serpent, whichever he was. But he doesn't do that. He sings the magic formula, the divine names. He is not a dragon-slaying knight. He's a master magician. And a master magician with his celestial magic can put the terrible guardian asleep. And then he can take the treasure that he needs. So this is also something to be important. Yes, there are times in life when we have to be valiant, when we have to fight. I don't deny that, but not always. And the more effective than the sword is the flame of consciousness. And we have to remember that. So, I don't blame people for going out and buying a lot of guns when things become really dangerous in the streets and so forth. I grew up out in rural Hungary in a house that was an arsenal, although it was never used. Once or twice a year, my father would take out all these rifles and guns and revolvers and things. It took about a day and a half to oil them and clean them and all that. And I stood there watching. Oh, how interesting! How nice! So obviously, at their own level, these things have a legitimacy, but when it comes to getting the pearl, when it comes to doing the great task, then the magic of the soul, the magic of the spirit, the power which was in the messenger to begin with has to be released and brought forth, and with that magic it is caught. But this is easier said than done, obviously. But one of the difficulties with it is that you live in a place, by place I mean a culture and so, not this particular place. You live in a place where the magic is not recognized. You live in a place where non-natural, supernatural forces are ignored and laughed at. You live in a world where the miraculous is ignored. And when you have that kind of an indoctrination, how are you going to take the pearl from the serpent? So this is why where an influence, a training, even belief in the transcendental, in the magical, in the mysterious, in the miraculous is of extremely great importance. If you can't accept the notion of a miracle, then you're lost. You're lost. Because it'll take a miracle to get you out of this mire into which you have fallen and into the deep sleep. It's not going to come from Washington. It's not going to come from Sacramento. It's not going to come from anything in this world. It's not going to come from the university. It's not going to come from the medical faculty. It's not going to come from anywhere. It's going to come from what is beyond this world. And if you can't accept even the possibility of something beyond this world, well, then just give up. Then you might as well forget it. You are nowhere and you are going to go nowhere. So we are constituted in such a way that before we can realize something, we have to some extent conceptualize it. Conceptualizing, imagining, which is making an image, and then you get there. But if you discard all of that, it's not going to come. It's not going to come out of books. It's not going to, heaven knows, it's not going to come out of the bloody blessed computer, a thing that I detest more every day, it's going to come from something implanted into you before the beginning of time. And when you touch it, and it will work. And then you'll be able to sing the magic conjuring hymn to put the serpent out of the way. You don't have to kill it. In fact, you probably can't kill it. But you can get it to the point that it will release the pearl. And so now he ascends on high. So really the work has been done now, but the return is interesting, and I'll give you some vignettes of it at least. Okay, let's see, where are we? Here. Okay. So he had seized the pearl, and he enchanted the terrible and roaring serpent, and he had got hold of the pearl. Now, he says, my letter, as it had awakened me with its voice, so it guided me with its light, as he is now leaving this realm of difficulty. With its voice it encouraged me in my fearful state, and with its love it drew me on. The same memento, the remembrance, you might say, this is a Greek word for it, which really is to remember the real. It's called anamnesis. It's the opposite of amnesis, which is amnesia, forgetting, So the anamnesis that enabled us to get hold of the pearl of consciousness now becomes our guide to the long way home. See, remember probably the most important words in the message that came to him. Remember who you are. This is the most important word. As long as the memory lasts, we are okay. When it vanishes, well, I would say then we are finished. We must hold on for dear life to the effective memory. It is the return vehicle that will take us to our true home, and that is really very important. Now he comes to the boundary, and there are these boundaries in the psychic world, because reality is not just this physical world here, but obviously there is an almost endless, boundless reality of various levels and beings and at the different parts, and he travels through these to get on high. I have not looked. Oh yeah, terrible it. In any event, I can summarize this. In any event, he comes to the boundary now, which is between all the lesser regions and his true home. And there are the messengers who bring him his robe. And that is really also a tremendous mystical scene when he clad himself in the robe and what he beholds there. It is because of the mystery of that robe, which he first relinquishes and then puts on again, that G.R.S. Mead called it the hymn of the robe of glory. And receiving the robe back is really his great accomplishment, in addition to having found the pearl. This is the real price. We had it once. We had the glorious robe once. and we shall regain it again. And when he looks at the robe as he's being invested into it again, myself entire I saw myself in it. So what is this now? As the result of him having found the treasure, or at least in connection with that, wholeness, entirety, that's what he receives now, full consciousness. He gained it here on earth. He wrested it from the demiurgic serpent of unconsciousness, and now it allows us to become whole, brings us to union with the celestial selfhood. One of the terms in, I think it's probably of Neoplatonic or Hermetic origin, was the shining augoides, which is a Greek word, the shining robe, the glory body. And so he rises now up to and presents the pearl to his parents. And interestingly enough, it doesn't even remain with the parents, but the parents take it yet to a higher source, to the ultimate reality, because this precious thing that has now been rediscovered belongs to the highest divinity. And a little bit about the robe in conclusion. My robe of glory, as I now beheld my robe, it seemed to suddenly to become a mirror image of myself. Myself entire I saw in it, and so now the hymn reveals itself as not just the hymn of the pearl, but the hymn of the robe of glory. And so he has returned to his original place. He has accomplished his task. And apparently, if the symbolism, which has a great deal of power in it, is understood, he has enriched the very heavens by the treasure that he brought. He has completed heaven itself. And this is a great mystery. This is the mystery of alchemy. This is the mystery of magic, because by getting hold of this mysterious pearl, it's somewhat like the stone of the philosophers. Through this, everything becomes complete. Everything becomes whole. This is the great healer that heals the heavens and the earth. And it is according to this marvelous story, this is the potential, this is the ability of the human to do it. But he has to awaken to it. You know, the part of descending and then being put to sleep, I think that part of it we pretty well have experienced already. You know, to a greater or lesser extent, I think we are all somnolent in a spiritual sense. But we can be awakened. We can be awakened. You go outside and look at the starry heavens and at the moon, and they will call to you, and they will say, remember who you are. Remember why you have come here. And if you remember your true nature, with your true nature you will prevail, and you will complete that which is incomplete. You will make whole that which will not whole, and you will bring about a universal completion and redemption. If you won't do it, nobody will do it. Because you are the world. You are your cosmos. And it is you, not a group of you, not a community, not a race, not a political party, not, I don't know, not all the boys sitting in the bar having a drink, although I have nothing against that. But you are extremely important. You can take the pearl, and you have to put out of the way that which stands in your and prevents you from doing it, because you have been sent here from another reality for a purpose of finding something that will complete things, something that will make for wholeness, and thereby will make for the enlightenment, the redemption, the salvation, the transcendence of all. We have been told that we can do it because we can. These are not the imaginations of a sacred poet. These are the descriptions of events that did take place, that do take place, and that with God's aid and our efforts shall take place with us and in us. And I thank you very much.